Hello, I'm Maria Christina and with me is Louisa. Today we have a fascinating guest in the studio with us, so welcome back to Charge.
Jonathan Baker is the COO of Simudyne, a company selling simulation software.
Their target market is Tier 1 banks, and they recently acquired a massive customer, Barclays.
Amazed that a company of 14 people pulled off such a big deal, we wanted to know all about how Simudyne approaches selling to Tier 1 banks.
Let's go! So Jonathan, if you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of how you came to Simudyne and your journey, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for a bit of context, I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer at Simudyne. As a company, I'll just tell you a little bit about why we exist before I tell you about how we came to be. It's a fundamental belief at Simudyne that all decisions of consequence will be subject to computer simulation in the future. So if you buy that thesis, it would make sense that there needs to be some kind of platform upon which you build those simulations. So we identified that a number of years ago and essentially set out to build that decision-making platform that people would use to build these computational simulations of the real world. Now, the founder, Justin, started this journey about almost a decade ago, building advanced simulations for the Department of Defense, essentially as a contractor in Iraq, supporting the warfighter. And he was doing predominantly consulting work. So he had a small consulting team. They would be deployed doing advanced analytics in Iraq, Iran, and so on. And a couple of years ago, he decided to pivot into a pure software business. So he'd done consulting for a while, and now he thought, how do I take all this knowledge and expertise that my consultants have learned and turn this into a product? So at that point, Justin hired a developer, and they worked together for a couple of years to build a prototype, which they went on and sold to a large oil company. But it was very, very much a kind of proof of concept solution at the time. At that point, I met Justin, and he was looking for somebody to productize this sort of minimum viable product they built into something that was really enterprise grade, a kind of solution you could sell to the Tier 1 banks of the world, Barclays, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, these kind of enterprises that need something that's secure and scalable. So we teamed up. We've been together for about a year now. We launched the product about 3 months ago. Barclays bought it. They're our first enterprise customer, and we're working our way through the list. But the goal is very much to transform the way decisions are made in the financial services space. And we believe that all decisions of consequence in the enterprise will eventually end up being on our Providence software.
So you say simulation. How will it work for a customer using it? I mean, I'm sat in front of the laptop. I'm using Simudyne. What does that look like?
So really high level, it's basically it's a software development kit, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a set of libraries which developers, modelers, what they call in banks, quants or strats, will use to build these simulations. And these are, we're not inventing a new market. There's well-known use cases for these. Banks are already doing this, but they're using high-performance computing environments that are very, very expensive to maintain. They require very specialized programming skills. So what we do is we provide a platform that uses languages and skills that they already have and know how to use, and we handle a lot of the complex orchestration process that you would need in a high-performance environment, and just give it to them on a plate in a bog-standard simulation environment using their existing infrastructure. I don't know whether we want to go down that rabbit hole. But,
So you basically strip it down. You make it as simple as possible for them to use.
Exactly, and we're running on bog standard commodity hardware, so what we call x86 architecture. So essentially setting up, using the bank's existing on-premises clusters or their cloud infrastructure to distribute these simulations across, as opposed to using high-performance computing environments.
Right now, obviously, your intended users for the product are banks. Is
Sure.
there any sort of on the horizon, any other markets that you think you might venture into?
Absolutely. So as I said at the start, we fundamentally believe that all decisions, right, of consequence, serious decisions, should be subject to computer simulation. Like in the 21st century, it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think If you think about the way a lot of decisions are made, like with gut instinct, with doing some sort of advanced curve fitting, but ultimately at the end of the day, just a lot of them are snap decisions, and these are really important because decisions like how do we set interest rates, decisions like should we, leave the common market. These affect millions of people. So to be making these decisions on a whim seems unusual. So we absolutely believe that all decisions of consequence will be subject to computer simulations, and that's across industries. That's telecommunications, oil and gas, obviously financial services, insurance, policy making. So all of these are in the horizon. There are a number of specific reasons why we've chosen financial services. Obviously the market is enormous. There are really pressing use cases for simulation in financial services. Many of them are regulatory driven. Many are just because the scale of some of the biggest banks is absolutely astronomical. So we're talking balance sheets of $1, $2, $3 trillion. Right? This is the size of the entire UK economy. So when you want to ask questions like what happens if Bank X goes down, these are questions which are so big and so complex. You have to. The only way you can answer them is with building large-scale computer simulations. So that's why we started there. But absolutely, we see this technology being used across the board.
So you clearly believe in the message that that Simudyne has created. How did you get there? How did you end up there?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Like any startup, the result is rarely what you initially set out and intended. I was actually for a number of years the head of mathematics at Glenmore and Winton, which is an academy down on the south coast. So I was always very passionate about mathematics, mathematical modelling. While I studied economics at Cambridge, I was very much interested in mathematics. That ended up being the bulk of my studies. And I was thinking for a long time about how you could apply these techniques in the real world. And at the time, it seemed rather strange that a lot of the applications that were happening were still being done with sort of pen and paper models. So things that you could solve analytically with a notepad or on a professor's whiteboard. And that seemed rather odd, given that we have essentially unlimited compute power now at our fingertips. So I was thinking about the overlap between economics and computational statistics and computer science for quite a while. What I decided to do, because I was down on the south coast, was actually move to London, where I set up a research consultancy, which I ran for about a year. That was really just to allow myself to live while I explored this space more. I ended up doing an accelerator with some speculative ideas around cybersecurity, actually. That was in Hammersmith through a hedge fund called Winton Capital. And that's where I met Justin. So, as I said, Justin had been working in the simulation space for a long time, and he was essentially looking for somebody to team up with him to help really productize the solution that he had at the time. So we got talking. We spent a couple of months thinking about what would be the skill sets required to build this kind of tool, because it's quite specialist. There's a number of people you have to bring in. You have to bring in distributed computing experts. You have to bring computational simulation experts. You have to bring in mathematicians. There's a whole suite of people that you would need. So we put together a plan which we sort of executed over the last 9 months. We're now 14 people. We've got 3 more joining in September. And we see ourselves being about 30, 35 but by mid-year 2018, and we'll grow from there. But it's been a whole host of twists and turns.
So you said that it takes a lot of skilled individuals to build a product like this.
Absolutely. But
inevitably it's going to change the requirements for staff in the company that you're selling to. It's no longer going to be people doing the simulations and ideas themselves on pad and paper, as you said, but people maintaining it and using it. How is the product going to change the staffing requirements at your customers' companies?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we would get asked this a lot. So when we set out to build this product, we thought very hard about the technologies that we were going to use to build it, the technologies that users would have to be familiar with, and we made a very important decision to make sure that we built the product with all of this in mind, so that when we sell into these institutions, they would not have to train staff up to use it, and they would not have to bring in additional resources. We made sure that all of the skills and expertise were already existing in the banks that we would sell to in the institutions.
And the software is intuitive.
The software is intuitive, a very, very comprehensive documentation. What's really important to understand is we do not want to build a professional services business. We have zero interest in doing any consulting projects.
Yeah.
We don't want to do any modelling help, anything like that. It's pure software. So we give you the software development kit, we give you the documentation. It's very, very robust. Should you need support, we can do a small amount of support, enterprise support, obviously for a fee. But we're very, very clear that you should not need to bring in additional resources.
So it's self-sufficient.
It's self-sufficient. What we have done is we've partnered with a number of professional services firms, ones that you would have heard of, who have become certified on our software and have trained internal teams with expertise. So let's say a large bank has the resources, but maybe they're committed on other projects. You could bring in one of our certified professional services providers to sort of prime the pump and get them going.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's exciting. Yeah, that sounds reasonable. I mean, it also takes the hassle away from you, and that's cool. So let's get into the nitty and gritty. So you're selling to tier 1 banks.
Mm-hmm.
You said earlier that you've managed to, partner with your first client is Barclays.
Yeah, not partnership. They are paying customer.
Sorry,
yeah,
my bad. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how that experience was, and sort of, did you have any preconceptions going into it? Did they have any preconceptions of going into it? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
small company coming in saying, we're going to change the way you work.
Yeah, that's not quite how we went in. But absolutely. So it's really important to understand that when you're selling to organisations of this size, you've got to accept that it's going to take a long time. So it's not just you walk in the door. You don't just walk in the door at Goldman Sachs and say, "Hey, where's the CIO? We need to sell this." You need to accept You need to accept that it's a long process. You also need to accept that there aren't really any silver bullets to this. You just have to throw a whole load of lead bullets at the problem, and something will take it down. So the process that we went for, which we found we had a lot of success with, and I hope this will be valuable to the listeners, is a kind of a two-pronged approach. So a top-down and bottom-up. So top-down is talking to the executives and the business and selling the business value of the software on a use case basis. And then the bottom-up is actually identifying the users of the software, the developers, the quants, the strats, getting it in their hands, getting them comfortable with it, and getting them to realise the value so then they can make the recommendation up. And you've got to have this two-pronged approach so you can kind of meet in the middle. So obviously the kind of the pitches and the sales expertise that you need for those two strategies are actually different. But it's really important, because if you just go in, as you said, Maria, by saying we're going to change how everything works, this is the next generation, you're selling that to the executives. A lot of them have seen this many times and they don't want to hear it. And a key question will be something like, well, how do I even know this works? How do I even know I have the skills? So if and when those questions come up, you can say, well, actually, there are multiple people in the bank who are already using this. Why don't you ask them and see if it's of value? So it's really important that you go both bottom up and top down. Another really important thing, I think, is to enter the bank from multiple angles, multiple divisions. So if you're thinking about the tier 1 banks, they operate all over the globe. They're also large separate entities under these big umbrellas. So you have the international operations, the retail bank, the corporate bank, the investment bank. A lot of these are actually very separate. Right? So you can actually start individual conversations with different areas of the bank, and you can actually start selling to these multiple areas. So rather than trying to do a great big enterprise license agreement with a large organisation, what we found is more successful is you sell to as many divisions as you possibly can, and then you let procurement come to you and say, hey, we're spending a lot of money with you. Why don't we do some kind of big agreement? Why don't we kind of do some kind of big contract where we get a better deal? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let them come to you once you...
Let them realise that they're spending quite a few millions on product, and let them propose an organisation-wide enterprise agreement. But until they do that, just keep going into those different divisions, because you'd be surprised how little they talk to each other.
What was the bank's attitude towards working with such a small company? You said you're 14, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Were there any tensions around a colossal bank working with a group of 14 people?
Yeah, so there were obviously reservations. We were fortunate enough to meet the chief executive of a large bank, and he said, one of the things that I'm worried about with you guys is that if we do decide to go organisation-wide, how on earth are you going to staff up? Because you're only 14 people. Mm-hmm. Some of the ways you can mitigate those risks are with partnerships with consultancy firms, system integrators, infrastructure providers, where you can basically get those organisations sort of certified and trained on your platform with a view that you could then deploy them into the organisation, on support contracts or with consulting projects to help ramp up and staff up. So if you think about organisations like PwC or Deloitte, these are huge companies with big balance sheets. So it kind of takes away the execution risk from your small company. So as you correctly said, the executives say, I'm worried. How are you going to staff up? And you say, well, we've got this suite of certified partners who can scale up, to pretty much whatever you would need. They've gone through this rigorous certification process. They've all paid for the software that we've certified them. These are the people that you could bring in should you need to. So that's one of the ways we got around that risk.
Right, so you didn't only have to sort of convince the banks of your, product, but you also had to go and look for those partners because they helped you make a name for yourself, basically. Yeah, you could
say that, but none of these partners are paying us, right? Mm-hmm. It's in their own interest to partner with organisations like this, because just to give you a sense of what the appetite could be for some of these partners, there was some regulation which has come out around large banks having to rotate their accountants every couple of years. So large accounting companies that had contracts with some big banks, some of them have been auditing certain banks for over 100 years. And all of a sudden, they're no longer able to do that. So a lot of these relationships have been broken down. There's also a bit of a moratorium at the moment in large banks on consultants because they just don't want the cost. So there are a number of very large consultants who are not in many large banks. So if you present the opportunity to bring them into the banks, then that can be a very, very attractive proposition for some large consultancies, particularly because a lot of them allocate quite a large amount of consulting time or large budgets to business development to sell into these large organisations. Mm-hmm. So if you can present on a plate to them potentially large consulting project, it's not just that they want the revenues from that, it's that they actually want to re-engage with the relationship. Advise any startups who are thinking about this approach, make sure you formalise the agreement with the partner, and if appropriate, you can also negotiate some kind of revenue share, because if you're selling software into a bank, then the service providers, the professional services providers, are going to make sort of 2, 3, 4 times more than you are. And given that you're bringing them the deal, it's only appropriate that you're kind of compensated fairly for that. So there wasn't a whole lot of convincing for us to do to bring in these external organisations.
But that's great. That means that you had, the product was appealing. Like, this is the key to the whole thing, right? So that's
obviously exactly. It's everything comes back to the product. So everything that we say here is premised upon: do you have solid product market fit and a product that's really compelling that people want? If you don't, then no amount of leveraging other people's sales forces and resources is going to help.
So, are there any challenges that you would like to sort of underline that you might have not expected when you first sort of started working with or entertaining the possibility of working with tier 1 banks?
Probably one of the kind of naive view of selling into a large organisation is you go in, you convince the executive team that you have this transformational solution, and they roll it across the entire organisation, and everybody's happy, and you go home, woohoo, we've done a great job. But in reality, it's much more like sort of trench warfare. It's inch by inch. You've got to go in. The idea of going in and doing a kind of enterprise-wide agreement on the first bat is, I think there probably are people who have done it, but I wouldn't say it's a reliable strategy. It's more like winning the lottery, if you get that. A way we kind of navigated that problem was we created what we call this stairway to simulation heaven. But this is, you can create your own analog for your own company, which is what's the minimum amount of money that the people that we're targeting can sign off in the shortest amount of time, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to do your research on your client. You'll have to find some friends at the firm and get these numbers. But the way we do it is we figure out who are the users of our product going to be. We get it in the hands of them. We develop some kind of business case around them, and then we have a very, very inexpensive trial license which we can give them to try out. Once they've installed it on their infrastructure and they're using it, then everything becomes much easier because they're already providing value with it. You can create a much stronger business case once it's on the infrastructure and they're using it than you could a priori. So we have a very small kind of pilot license which we get in their hands. After sort of 3 months, we revisit, we do a review of the process, and we move to a much kind of larger, what we call a distributed pilot, where we allow them more people to get involved, we allow them to use more compute power, and we define a much kind of stronger use case around it. So the first pilot, which we call a POC, a proof of concept, is around doing sort of data science on your laptop on a single machine. Once we prove the value in a kind of proof of concept sense, so we move to a distributed pilot where we say, how could this look in a production environment in your bank if we use multiple machines? And once we've got to that stage, we're sort of 6 months into the process, and then we can start talking about how would you really integrate this with your live streams, so you can actually start making real decisions off it. And that's where we get to the full enterprise license, which we sell in. By the time you've done the proof of concept and the pilot, you know the procurement people, you've gone through the process. If you're lucky, you're on their preferred supply list. And once you get to that point, you're ready to start negotiating a bigger deal. But it's a slow process. You've got to be willing to step your way up to a large agreement. But if and when you do get there, the prizes are enormous. So you just have to be relentless in that process of getting there. Because what you've got to remember is when you're selling a solution like ours or any piece of enterprise software into a big organization, while you may think that it's the best thing in the world and it's your number one priority, a lot of the users are doing this alongside their day job. This is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 down on their own priority lists. So you've really got to do everything you can to make it as easy and as possible for your users to really get value out of this product. So that means phoning them up regularly, sending your support team over there to help them out, sending them interesting content, and really helping them really helping get to a point where they can say, this is really adding value to the firm. I want to take this to my boss because I think that this will look good for me and this will be great for the organisation.
Mm-hmm. So the future, you have every intent of hiring the best, the smartest people. And you've had one big win so far, Barclays. How are you going to leverage your first win to get more tier 1 banks?
The strategy is still the same. The execution has got slightly easier. So the first sale, as you imagine, is tremendously hard. You're really pushing a big boulder up a very, very large hill to convince a tier 1 bank to adopt your software across the organisation in a meaningful way, with no customers and with no revenue, is a really, really tough feat. But if you can get there, as you imagine, one of the heuristics that people use for whether or not they should engage with you is who else is engaging. So once you've got one, it just gets much, much easier. Mm-hmm. We already have sold smaller solutions, so the pilots, the POCs that I've told you about, to a number of other banks as well as Barclays. So once you get a few logos in your deck, you start to get a snowball effect. Mm-hmm. That's another thing which we haven't really touched on. which relates to the idea of scaling, is the power of momentum in a small company.
Yes.
It's absolutely critical. So if you can really harness momentum in the right way, that can really, really change the trajectory of the company. And it's very hard to explain this to people unless you've experienced it. But taking every success, rolling it into the next one, having a bigger success, and constantly maintaining that momentum is absolutely critical. And this is one of the things that I think is core to our culture, which is every success we have, we share as a company. So whatever happens in the company that's a success, everybody will know about it. So every big meeting we have, every success, we announce this publicly in our daily stand-ups. So you should be able to walk into the office and ask anybody, whether they're working on PR, whether they're one of our back-end developers, whether they're a designer, and say, where's Simudyne at? Where are they right now? And they should be say, well, we just closed this big deal. We have meetings with the chief of staff from this and this company, and this is really exciting because at our next funding round we're going to have a great valuation and so on. So we really think hard about how we articulate all of our successes across the organisation.
And it's empowering.
It's really empowering, and then anybody else who comes in, who speaks to anybody in the company, can kind of take some of that positive energy and momentum, and then they go out and then they speak to their network, and it's a big reinforcing cycle. And as I'm sure you can imagine, if you don't get this right, it can happen in the opposite direction, and that can really lead to some tricky situations.
So internally, clearly this is quite a successful strategy. You've empowered your employees, you've made everyone feel good about Simudyne. Have you seen any effects outside of the company? So have people started coming to you saying, oh, I want to work for you, or I believe in your message?
Yeah, we have. So it's both on the hiring front, but actually more on the client front. So we came out of the Techstars Accelerator with a big boom. We really focused strongly on how we present our message, on how we communicate the value of our product, on the successes that we had commercially. So we had a lot of momentum there. Once we finished this, we had a number of people approach us. So we're working through that backlog. What was really interesting that we're very excited about is we had a number of people approach us from areas that we were not actively targeting. So we've had quite a bit of interest from the hedge fund space. So as you know, these people make money from arbitraging markets, trying to make markets more efficient. And a lot of them are experimenting with different kinds of simulation technology at the moment to try and get that edge. So if we just take a step back a minute and think about what is predictive analytics, which is obviously the space around doing predictive modeling to forecast the future, it's kind of composed of three things. So it's your standard computational statistics, which people are calling sort of machine learning at the moment. That's a very hot space, but there's also computational simulation and network modeling, and it's the combination of these three things that really are the future of predictive analytics. There's a lot of interest in machine learning at the moment, which we think is slightly paradoxical in the sense that a lot of the really interesting questions that are coming up around what happens if we introduce drones mainstream in London? What happens if we move, autonomous vehicles like taxis? What if those become self-driving? What if the Chinese economy slumps? These aren't really questions that are amenable to machine learning techniques because there is no data. They've actually never happened before. So you've actually got to do a computer simulation in order to answer and get insight into these spaces. So this is why organisations like hedge funds are looking very seriously at this technology as a way to predict and get foresight into a future that's very, very uncertain.
Okay, well, I think that's about all we have time for. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much for joining us.
That wraps it up for this week.
A big thank you to Jonathan for joining us and to you for listening.
We welcome you to contact us at charge@develop.co.uk or on Twitter @develop_team.
Catch you next time.